For millennia now, Gaza and its inhabitants have continually been a source of conflict and opposition in regard to God's plan for Israel. Today it's no different, despite the fact that Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire and a plan to exchange hostages for Palestinian prisoners. And yet, while men plan for peace, the Bible seems to say that we haven't witnessed the end of the conflict. In this week's episode of the Weekly Scroll, we're going to discuss these things, and more importantly, how this small strip of land might play a role in the revelation of Israel's Messiah.
If you enjoy watching this and other great content from Jacob's Tent, download the Jacob's Tent app today. Gain access to the latest videos, teachings, and exclusive content all in one location. Stay connected and up to date with everything happening in the tent with the Jacob's Tent app, available on the App Store, Google Play, or wherever you find your apps.
Well, welcome to the Weekly Scroll. This week, I wanted to focus on what is presently occurring in the Gaza Strip as a result of the recent ceasefire agreement and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas. On Monday, thousands of Palestinians began streaming back into the northern part of the Strip after Israel lifted its closure. Palestinians were allowed to cross on foot without any inspection and then return to their homes, but with a warning. Israel has cautioned them that any transfer of militants or weapons would be considered a breach of this agreement. Of course, Hamas, true to their nature, is calling this return a victory for our people and a declaration of failure and defeat for the occupation and transfer plans. As it relates to those transfer plans, that's an interesting point that we'll return to in just a moment. Now, one mother of three told reporters that she had walked about 4 miles to reach her damaged but still habitable home in Gaza City, and that's where she saw her younger sister for the first time in more than a year. She and other families were among about 1 million people who fled to southern Gaza in October of 2023 as Israel began its military campaign against Hamas. In fact, it's been estimated that about 90% of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been displaced, at least according to some news agencies. Now, back over here, President Trump had this to say in regard to the current situation, quote, "I'm looking at the whole Gaza Strip right now, and it's a mess. It's a real mess. It's literally a demolition site right now. Almost everything's demolished, and people are dying there." But that isn't the only thing the new president has noted about Gaza. As a man who made his fortune in real estate, it's not really surprising that he would have some non-traditional views on the future of Gaza. And having that perspective, Trump has said this: "It's a phenomenal location on the sea. The best weather, Some beautiful things could be done with it, but Gaza has to be rebuilt in a different way." In other words, he feels that something could be done to make the region more pleasant to the eye. And that's an observation that might have more prophetic significance than we could imagine. And so it is that the president's assessment of the situation has led him to raise a controversial issue, and that is the possible resettlement of around 1.5 million of these displaced persons. Trump said that he would like to see Jordan, Egypt, and other neighboring Arab nations increase the number of Palestinian refugees they are now accepting from the Gaza Strip and just, quote, "clean out the whole thing." Now, by that, he means he'd like to see a large part of the populace removed from this war-torn area in order to create a virtual clean slate. Trump said this: "Something has to happen, and I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing in a different location where they can maybe live in peace for a change." Noting that this part of the world has had many conflicts over centuries is why Trump feels that resettling some of the displaced persons might be advantageous, adding that this could be, quote, temporary or long-term. Now, as you might imagine, this transfer plan, going back to the Hamas statement from earlier, is being met with a lot of stiff resistance. Others in the region argue that such a drastic displacement of people would contradict Palestinian identity and the people's deep connection to Gaza. Jordan's foreign minister, Amin Safadi, told reporters that his country's rejection of this proposed transfer of Palestinians was, quote, firm and unwavering. Now, historically, Jordan has resisted any effort to absorb so-called Palestinian refugees, as well as these other nations. Now, back home, Senator Lindsey Graham, when asked about what Trump meant with his remark regarding Palestinians, said this: the idea that all the Palestinians are going to leave and go somewhere else, I don't see that to be overly practical. But Graham also added that Trump should keep talking to Mideast leaders about what their plan is for the Palestinians. Now, I should point out that these statements from the president coincided with his decision to end former President Biden's hold on sending a supply of large bombs to Israel. Of course, Biden had held on to these bombs in an effort to dissuade Israel from launching an all-out assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Of course, a month later, Israel did just that and took control of the city, but only after the vast majority of the 1 million civilians that had been living there or sheltering there had fled. When asked why he lifted the ban on those bombs, Trump responded, because they bought them, which I find amusing. Anyway, the point is, while Trump seems to be genuinely concerned about the plight of the displaced Gazans, it's also very clear that he has been unapologetically pro-Israel. Remember, it was Trump who in his first administration moved the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in recognition that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. It was Trump who recognized the Golan Heights as sovereign Israeli territory. So hopefully, President Trump is going to continue in his unabashed support of our friends in Israel, even as he raises the issue of what to do with the suffering of so many caught between the two opposing forces, that is Hamas and the IDF. Now, in recognition of his support for the Jewish state, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Trump for, quote, keeping your promise to give Israel the tools it needs to defend itself. All of this, of course, is occurring because Hamas and Israel have paused the fighting. I'm going to put it that way. They've paused the fighting and began exchanging some of the hostages held by Hamas for Palestinian prisoners that have been held in Israeli prisons. Negotiations have yet to begin on the more difficult second phase of the deal, and that would eventually see the release of all the hostages being held by Hamas, and it's surmised bring a halt to the fighting. And on that note, the Israeli government has warned that if the remaining hostages are not released, the war will resume. And that thought is what brings us to our main point for the day. All these men have their plans, and all these politicians have their statements to make. But what does God say? What does the Bible have to say? And particularly in regard to the Gaza Strip. Now, the word Gaza means strong, as in a stronghold, a strong fortification, which is very interesting considering Gaza's relation to Israel. In other words, it has always been a source of frustration. Now, Gaza is first mentioned as one of the border cities of Canaan, and that's in Genesis chapter 10, and has from the beginning been considered to be part of the Holy Land, in other words, Israel. In fact, Gaza was listed among Judah's promised territories. But Gaza never developed a significant Israelite presence during the biblical period. Even when it was captured by the people of Judah from time to time, it would almost immediately revert to the Philistines, who were a seafaring people who had migrated from Crete, had annihilated the original inhabitants, who were the Avites, and you can read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 2. Now, as you know, the Bible has a lot to say about the Philistines and the different conflicts that arose between them and between the people of Israel. The point is this: Gaza and its inhabitants have been a constant thorn in Israel's side. Moreover, the Philistines, a people whose name, by the way, evolved into the modern term Palestinian, the Philistines, in conjunction with Gaza, were always antagonistic toward Israel. And so again, Gaza and all that this region entails, including the people, has always represented opposition to God's purpose for Israel. And here's another important fact. History bears out that claiming to be Palestinian, as it is currently invoked, didn't really come into vogue until the mid to late 1960s, probably as a result of the Six-Day War and its aftermath, specifically the overwhelming defeat of Israel's enemies. And and this is the point, that's when the PLO started self-identifying as Palestinian, and more as a political maneuver than anything else. In other words, Yasser Arafat and others weaponized the term Palestinian in order to delegitimize Israel. And so it is that Gaza is emblematic of the opposition to the biblical mandate to possess the land that was deeded to Israel and to his seed. And so again, for millennia, Gaza and its people have been to Israel what thorns and thistles were to Adam, and for the same reason, really. In a word, compromise. Though definitely part of Israel's borders, it was rarely conquered, rarely controlled, and that continues to this very day. In recent past, Israel administered the Gaza Strip after the Six-Day War in 1967, but then withdrew completely in 2005. And I would say that withdrawal is what led to Hamas taking control of the area, which in turn has brought us to the current situation. In spite of all of that, because of its consistent warring against Israel and the sins that Hamas and others have committed against the people of God, God, through his word, has warned of judgment for Gaza and the surrounding area. Through the prophet Jeremiah, the Lord spoke to a host of nations, but including Gaza and the land of Philistines, he said that they would fall and rise no more because of the sword which I will send among you. Through Amos, he said, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment, because they took captive the whole captivity to deliver them up to Edom. But I will send a fire upon the wall of Gaza, which shall devour its palaces. I will cut off the inhabitant from Ashdod, and the one who holds the scepter from Ashkelon. I will turn my hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish. And then through Zephaniah, God said, for Gaza shall be forsaken. Woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast! The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines. I will destroy you, so there shall be no inhabitant. The seacoast shall be pastures, with shelters for shepherds and folds for flocks. The coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah, and they shall feed their flocks there. In the house of Ashkelon they shall lie down at evening, for the Lord their God will intervene for them, and get this, and return their captives. That last statement is rather interesting in light of the present situation. The Lord will return their captives. Now, here's another prophecy from Zechariah. It says, Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza also shall be sorrowful, and Ekron, for he dried up her expectation. The king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. The point of all these prophecies is, in spite of those who wish to see Gaza rebuilt, and maybe it will to some extent, we'll have to wait and see, and having it rebuilt, maybe their objective is in a better way, to build something different from our point of view anyway. Nevertheless, the Bible makes it clear that as long as the enemies of Israel inhabit that strip of land, it's marked for destruction. Now, I realize that is not the politically correct thing to say, but it is the biblically correct thing to point out. But I also want to add that there are some prophecies, including the one we read portions of from Zechariah, that say this: in spite of complete destruction, there will be a remnant in the land of the Philistines who decide to call upon the God of Israel. You see, the God of Israel always gives opportunity to anyone who would call upon him for deliverance to be saved, even if they live in a land that he has marked for devastation. There's no doubt in my mind that among the millions of people who call Gaza home, there are those who, just like you and me, want to earn a living, want to raise a family, and live in some semblance of peace. And perhaps if that were the goal of some politicians in the region, maybe they might reconsider Mr. Trump's considerations as far as resettlement. We'll have to wait and see how that all pans out. But my point is this: there will be those in the Gaza Strip that will call upon the God of Israel. And so then you and I, we should keep the innocent in prayer, knowing that God is well able to identify those whose hearts are ready to hear the truth that there is only one God and his Messiah is Yeshua. And on that note, I want to point out that Gaza was actually associated with the spread of the gospel, although it was only mentioned in the New Testament once. That's in Acts chapter 8, and it's in verse 26, when an angel told the disciple Philip to take the desert road from Jerusalem to Gaza. And it was while Philip was on that road that he encountered the Ethiopian eunuch, who was, it just so happens that at that very moment he was struggling to understand the prophecies that were recorded in Isaiah 53. And of course, most of you know how that story turns out. In other words, somewhere near a place that has historically been filled with hostility toward the Lord and toward his people actually served as a starting point for an Ethiopian to hear of the Messiah and of the grace of God. And then from there, the gospel was spread to Ethiopia and to other parts of Africa. So I don't want you to miss this very important fact. Gaza is actually connected to the mystery of Yeshua being revealed. Perhaps you've heard of the term Yeshua. This is a term that's used in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, pretty much exclusively by Israelis, whereas the nations will use terms like West Bank or occupied territories. But Yeshua, which is in Hebrew spelled Yud Shin Ayin, it's actually, or in this context anyway, is used as an acronym, used to refer to the areas of Judea or Yehuda, Shomron or Samaria, and Gaza or Gaza. In other words, if you take the first letters in each of those terms, Yehuda, Shomron, and Gaza, it's Yud Shin Ayin, Yeshua. But Yeshua is also a Hebrew root word that means to save. In fact, this is the root word that gives us the name Yeshua, which means salvation right now. Now, where the acronym is concerned, what if I were to phrase it this way? Yehuda, Shomron, and Gaza. In other words, inserting the letter Vav, which in Hebrew serves as the conjunction and, A-N-D. The result would be Yud, Shin, Vav, Ayin, which is the name Yeshua, salvation right now. And I find that fascinating. Remember, Israel abandoned Gaza, which would be represented by the letter Ayin, the first letter in the word Gaza. They abandoned Gaza in 2005. In other words, the Ayin would be removed. The result in Hebrew would be Yud Shin Vav, Yeshu. And oddly enough, Yeshu is currently the term used by many Israelis, Jews all over the world for that matter, to identify the Messiah Yeshua, to call him Yeshu, and in fact, some people consider that to be a curse. Now, this is important to know, or to observe anyway, because the letter Ayin, remember, it's the first letter in the word Gaza, and if Gaza is missing from Israel, the I is missing, because that's what an ayin is. It's an eye. It's emblematic of the eyes by which we see. And so then, here's the point, where Yeshua is concerned, for most Israelis, their eyes can't see him. He's concealed from them. And does this have anything to do with the fact that Gaza, the eyeing in Yeshua, is missing? They can't see him. He's concealed. But just like the light of creation, he's still there. And he will be revealed, according to Scripture, when things are at their darkest. And so all of this is to say, it seems to me anyway, that Gaza and all that is currently transpiring there plays a very significant role in revealing Yeshua, not just to unbelieving Israelis, but also to unbelieving Gazans and anyone else who calls upon the name of the Lord. Of course, the powers of darkness are going to do everything they can to oppose the will of God, meaning that Gaza and everything it represents, it's a stronghold. All of that has to be overcome. Because you see, when the ayin, or Gaza, is returned to Yeshua, in other words, when the prophecies concerning Gaza are brought to fruition, the one who has been hidden will be revealed. So I'm going to crawl out onto a limb and I'm going to say this. Gaza, the war in Gaza, and all the things that are going on right now in the Middle East, particularly as it relates to Israel and Hamas and the Gaza Strip and all these displaced people, I believe that when all is said and done, we will see that it has something to do with Israel seeing Yeshua instead of Yeshu. I realize that none of us know for certain just what's going to transpire next. Men have their agendas, but God has his plan. So let's stay tuned. Let's keep our eyes and ears open, especially our eyes, because things are bound to get very interesting.
If you enjoyed these videos and value our content here at Jacob's Tent, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell and never miss the latest info and insights from Bill and the team. And most of all, you can help us spread the message. By sharing these videos with others, you'll be helping to grow our interactive community together.